Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. Welcome, everybody. I am excited to introduce to you my friend, Dr. Sunjya Schweig. Dr. Schweig is an expert in complex chronic illnesses, which requires vigorous investigation and management. He's been studying, teaching, and practicing integrative and functional medicine for over 25 years. As CEO and co-director of the California Center for Functional Medicine, or CCFM, Dr. Schweig believes that a precision and individualized medicine approach is fundamental for managing patients with chronic illness. CCFM is at the forefront of the functional medicine movement, offering patients a deep investigative approach to healthcare that is both high-touch and high-tech. Dr. Schweig received his BA from the University of California, Berkeley. He attended medical school at the University of California, Irvine, where he helped design and lead the complementary and alternative medicine curriculum. Dr. Schweig completed his family medicine residency at the University of California, San Francisco, and family practice residency program in Santa Rosa, California. He's deeply invested in helping people with complex chronic illness recover, and I'm so grateful that he agreed to be talking to us today. Welcome, Dr. Schweig.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cool. So you have so many wonderful pearls and sort of foundational advice for people struggling. And before we get into that, I would love for you to tell a little bit about your story and what brought you to this path and line of work.
Absolutely. So I had a very alternative upbringing. My parents were moved from the East Coast to the West Coast in the late 60s, early 1970s, and adopted, vegetarian lifestyle. They were some of the earliest people in our country to be learning yoga and meditation. And, so from a very early day, our childhood was infused with natural healing, mindfulness practices, yoga practices, as they were on their journey towards healing. And so, that was kind of the fabric and the milieu that I grew up in. And, I actually lived in India for 6 years of my childhood. And so we were exposed to Ayurveda and homeopathy and all of the choices that were made around, how and when and what to choose with regards to healthcare, were, first based in the lifestyle pillars of health. And then, there's this wide sort of menu to choose from of options. And, so we use a lot of homeopathy and herbs and, a variety of different supplements. And, so that was sort of my background. And, I came back from India, went to grade school, went to a pretty traditional college prep high school, and then to UC Berkeley. And, the idea of going into medicine sort of, percolated up within me over time. And I remember thinking about it in high school. I had a grandpa who was a physician who I knew somewhat well, but not super well. So I knew of the path, but there wasn't any like direction or pressure from within my family. And, I sort of clarified that vision over time and at Berkeley studied medical anthropology and religious studies combination. But was already starting to research, my senior thesis was on homeopathy within allopathic medicine. I at least interviewed some of the, most famous homeopaths in Berkeley and shadowed with them and interned. So I knew that I wanted to go into medicine. I loved science. I knew I wanted to do an MD, degree program because I wanted that, depth of training and the integrity and the sort of acceptance to go with it, because I knew that I was going to be, taking a left turn after training, if you will, and I didn't really, I wanted to sort of set myself up with a foundation that everyone could, understand and not question, so that I could then be more creative and open-minded with my career after that.
Beautiful. And within that, you have chosen to specialize with sort of the sickest of the people. How did that come about?
Yeah, so, I did my residency, as you mentioned, at the UCSF Santa Rosa Family Practice Residency Program. And as part of that work, we definitely, as you've experienced, I'm sure, we're taking care of some pretty sick people, and very high need, high acuity, low resource, both in terms of money and what people can afford to buy, but also frequently low resource in terms of understanding and education and sort of what entails an optimal health path. So I had that experience there, but mostly within the mainstream system, and it was actually right. And again, I was on this functional medicine path, so I came out and started my functional medicine practice with a mentor of mine at Hope Park Medical Center, and kind of had this idea that I was going to help avoid a lot of the treatments that that people end up on, blood pressure lowering medicines, diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, pain, inflammation, etc. And right at that time point, actually, my wife was diagnosed with Lyme disease, and it was in retrospect her second tick bite, and she had been sick for almost 10 years. Not debilitatingly, but weird things happening here and there that nobody could explain after seeing many different specialists. And right there in 2007 was when she had that second exposure in Mendocino, and she became really clearly classically acutely ill with Lyme. And so that really put me onto a new path. Did a deep dive on Lyme disease, and it was very eye-opening. I'd already kind of chosen this sort of alternative path, but here was this sort of ultra alternative situation where there's this whole controversy in the medical field. It was this war zone almost of different opinions, and no real path in terms of treatment and diagnosis and recovery. And so it was really with that based on learning about what was happening to help care for her, that I got more and more versed in it. And people find us over time. And once they heard I was doing this work, that I was open-minded, that I was coming at it from an integrative medicine point of view, that I had a functional medicine toolkit, it kind of chose me at that point. And I think about it like a frog in a hot pot of water. It's like it feels, you get to these points where it feels overwhelming, and you're like, gosh, this isn't quite what I thought I was going to be doing. And it's really intense, and it's can be exhausting at times. But then you kind of just adjust, and you kind of go up to the next level, and you keep going. And I always chose that this is what I was going to do. I was going to keep going. And there's something about the complexity of it that's really gratifying. And there's a lot to it, about the, just the hope that we can give people when they've been on a path for 10 or 15 years, and they've seen 17 doctors over multiple medical specialty centers, and they're not getting answers, and they're being told, there's nothing on your testing, there's nothing wrong with you. And so that's what really keeps me in it, is that light that comes back on in their eyes and on their faces when I meet with them and I tell them I believe you and this is real. We do a bunch of testing, and I can show them data on the testing that points to new directions, and that like aha moment is probably my favorite moment. That sense of like, sure, it's not going to be quick and easy, but we're in this together, we're collaborating, and we have directions to go, and we're just going to start trying things. And so that's what keeps me going.
Well, there's so much in there, and I just want to say at this point that everyone out there who's self-diagnosed or been diagnosed with Lyme now wants to come be your patient. So at risk of like overwhelming your practice, can you speak to the need for, or the way in which people could vet their doctors so that they can find someone as open-minded and well-versed as you? How can people find doctors who really know this?
Yeah, it's a very important thought. It's a very important pain point, I would say. The first is that you just have to find, even if they're within the mainstream system, someone who's open-minded, who doesn't bring a ton of ego to the table, who is willing to look broadly and to think broadly, and who's willing to play a collaborative care role and doesn't feel like, it's their way or the highway, and they're willing to kind of look at, because a lot of folks out there are, like you said, reading a ton, um, listening to online summits and podcasts and blog articles and books and trying out different supplements and herbs. And so it really requires being flexible and being someone who's willing to collaborate. And I learn every day from my patients, and I'm happy to tell them, wow, I didn't know that. And send me that article. I'd love to read that. So open-minded. There's organizations, of course, like ILADS or IFM. There's organizations like the Bay Area Lyme Foundation, really great organization out where we are. And you can find doctors who have been vetted and who have been, sort of, who are willing to do this work.
Yeah, and we'll include some of the links to those places as well as to your practice. I know you have a lot of programs coming up that are going to be online so that people might be able to learn with you, work with you from afar too. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are in the middle of a huge clinic redesign right now. The acronym for our clinic is CCFM, California Center for Functional Medicine. We're calling it CCFM 2.0. And, it's just a really amazing opportunity to just re-envision everything we're doing. And, your point of being hard to find doctors who do this work, we see that on the patient side, and we see that on the doctor side too. It's hard to find providers, but it's also hard to be the clinic where you don't have enough bandwidth to take care of all the people who need help. And patients are, appointments are booking out months in advance. And so what we're really looking at doing is we call it a high touch and high tech model at the same time. Basically on the high touch side is to build a care team, right? So you have a doctor, you have mid-level practitioners like nurse practitioners and PAs, you have the health coach, you have nutritionists, maybe even a social worker, you have patient admin support folks, and they're working together to provide a cohesive layer of support for that person. And we're leveraging the technology at the same time. We're looking, I'm really passionate about data and data visualization and, this whole mobile health or health 2.0 movement, where, wearables like the Aura Ring, for example, I'm wearing one here, where you can track your steps and your sleep and your heart rate variability for your nervous system set point and your resting heart rate, and map that onto different cycles of time or treatments. Symptom tracking is really big, right? Because a lot of the fluctuation of what's happening to people just in general, but also in response to a dietary intervention or doing a DNRS program or doing some kind of emotional healing or EFT, looking at what's happening to their physiology. And then, having a dashboard where all that data lives, where the care team can interact with it, and everyone can now see what's happening to that person. So, and then layering in not just the person-to-person care, right, but basically trying to take it from being this sort of episodic care visit model, which is very reactive, like patient comes in and says, hey, this and that and the other thing is happening to me, what can we do about it? So it's this sort of episodic reactive care model. We're looking to move that to more of a proactive, mapping out steps in advance, reacting in real time, and having an improved communication platform between patient and practice. But then similar to you, like loading a lot of content online and having that be delivered in a group setting or a community, group visit model, with different Q&A sessions or interactive sessions, so we can leverage everybody's time and have, really also try to adjust for how health behavior change is made. I'm guilty of overwhelming people. They come in and I give them this huge long list of tests to do. I give them this huge long supplements and it's like, oh my God, where do I start? And so really like kind of creating a model where we can drip that out over time and give them support, give them community. I think it's very exciting. So I'm really passionate about our next steps.
Beautiful. Well, I'm excited about those too. And I want to get to the piece of the high tech and the labs that you order. One of the things that struck me at one of the conferences I heard you speak at was about SIBO. And I think you're the first person I ever heard talk about how important it is to order 3 different companies' tests for the same stool analysis, I think. Are you still doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my first round of testing in terms of on the functional medicine side still does include two separate stool tests with different companies and a SIBO breath test. SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and it's tested through a breath sample test where you collect different breath samples every 15 minutes over a several-hour period. And so you're watching to see kind of where the bacteria is in the gut and what subtypes there is. Certainly not a perfect test, but very important. And then I also frequently, up at the start date, will test hormones, adrenals, et cetera. And then on blood testing, we look at a bunch of different markers, like really wide net. It varies depending on person's insurance status, et cetera. But yeah, the gut, and to me, it's very clear that the gut, as Hippocrates says, is really the center of the universe and the center of health. And we have over 70% of our immune system there. It's an incredible site of interaction, this interface with the outside world, right? So everything from our mouth to our anus is really outside of our body. It's the outside world. And it's a place where a lot of inflammation can occur, a lot of immune dysregulation, a lot of autoimmune activation. And these are all factors which are then, things like Lyme disease or co-infections or heavy metals or mold, really will crank up the volume on potentially pre-existing issues. And so, before we go in and try to use a lot of aggressive treatments like antibiotics or even herbal remedies for some of these things, it makes sense to try to get rid of the problems and the triggers. And so we do find that deep dive on the gut microbiota still is a very, very important part of our practice. And we'll go through several rounds of treatment. So it might even be like 6-9 months of gut treatment while we're layering other things in. But, I think that's pretty unique about what we do is we just kind of sit on that gut piece for as long as it seems like we need to. And yeah.
So you and I diverge in that one place, which is that I don't do a ton of testing because what I've found over the years is that, and this is mostly when people come to me having already had things tested, it doesn't ever really change my management, which is heal the gut, do an elimination diet. If that doesn't work, 2.0 elimination, take out the legumes and the grains also. And that to me, there seems to be a subset of people who won't get better with that, but most people who don't have SIBO or a big parasite overgrowth get better. So I wonder, what am I missing there? What should I be testing for? Why is that not a good approach?
No, that is a great approach. And we actually use a similar approach in our practice. So for example, when a patient signs up, they will actually see our nurse practitioner or health coach first. And that person will take the full history, order those labs I just mentioned, which might take the person a couple of months to complete, and then implement the diet. And so they get them cooking, they get them started on the cleanup phase, get them optimizing stress reduction, all the lifestyle pillars, right? Sleep. And then a couple months pass, they've gotten the labs completed, they come to see me and ask the question of, okay, what happened when you did X, Y, and Z? What do the labs show? How much better are you? By doing those basic lifestyle factor pieces, you're taking care of a lot of inflammation, immune dysregulation, immune confusion, autoimmune activation, stuff that you would be kind of hitting your head against the wall trying to treat with a drug or a supplement. So I think you're right. So we just kind of do it all simultaneously. And I think that most of the people we see, I don't get a lot of those low-hanging fruit that are like, oh, I'm all better by just doing that, right? So it's certainly part of the puzzle. You have to nail that one down, along with a bunch of other factors. But it's more like sort of clean the slate so that we're now ready to embark on this next phase.
Right. I wonder if you'd be willing to speak to those pillars, because you and I know what they are, but this would be a great place to just review for everybody kind of what those mainstays of foundational health are.
Absolutely, yeah. So nutrition, I would put number one. Let food be thy medicine. Make sure we're not eating foods which are inflammatory, causing intestinal permeability, causing autoimmune activation, etc. Stress reduction and mindfulness, super important. Regulating your nervous system. A lot of times our bodies get stuck in fight, flight, or limbic activation. And in order to heal, and in order to kind of tell your body, oh, it's okay, you're fine, calm down, let's move on to this next phase of recovery, you have to be actively working on those. Sleep, super important, right? So, how much sleep you're getting, the quality of the sleep, variety of different lifestyle hacks that we can do to try to optimize that, targeting, supplements if we need to, etc. And movement, right? So, and a mix of movement. So, stretch, strengthening, cardiovascular, time outside in nature, etc. So I would put those as the sort of foundation for, and then we kind of expand them from there.
And do you get a lot of resistance from your patients who really just want to stay on the physical limb of their tree and not branch into sort of the stress management, the psycho-spiritual, emotional, other limbs?
No, not really. Yeah, I mean, that's probably my other favorite thing about our practice is that, people have been through a lot, and they've been on a health journey for a long time. And, sometimes they're pretty stuck. Sometimes they've gotten some traction, but are still not where they need to be. And they're very smart. They've read and they've done a ton of other work. They really have a lot of experience, but they might not have sequenced things right, or they might not have fully optimized different parts of the pillar. And so when we ask them to do, when I have one visit and I say, okay, let's do this, X, Y, and Z interventions, and then I come back, it's not really a question of did you do them, it's more of a question of what happened when you did them, because they're very invested, very motivated. And that's a hugely gratifying part of the work, right? Because people are engaged. They want help. They're willing to do what it takes. We get some that are, takes them a couple of reminders to kind of get going, but that's also why we're really passionate also about building in a better health coaching structure. Sort of just doing that hand-holding piece that really doesn't and shouldn't need to be done by a physician, cost-wise, time-wise, and education-wise. I'm not an expert at it, right? So having someone who can guide that person and explore what are the barriers, what's keeping this person held back. And so, yeah, all those pieces are part of what we're trying to build in and optimize.
Beautiful. So one of the things I wanted to return to was this question of finding a doctor or a practitioner or someone who cares and who understands this road, this rocky road that many people are on right now. One of the things that was a litmus test for my patients was, just my willingness to learn. And you talked about this too. I think the very first person who came to me with Lyme, before I even had Lyme, sort of handed me this giant stack of internet research and was like, if you're going to be my doctor, you got to read this first.
Right.
And that can be very off-putting for doctors. Luckily, I'm hard to put off.
Right.
And I took it on as a challenge. And I think people need to feel emboldened to ask for what they need, right? Because you're not going to necessarily know from a first visit whether someone's a humble, open learner, right? What sort of questions do your patients ask to vet you, or what would you encourage people to think about asking their new providers to kind of see if they're going to be someone they can collaborate with?
Yeah, it's super important. It's a good question. Because you're right, you can't just kind of walk in like a bull in a china shop and be like, I have Lyme disease, and are you going to treat me or not? That would be off-putting to me, right? Because the physician has a lot of education, they have a lot of pattern recognition, and I guess you just want to understand, are they willing to look at it? I would say something like, I'm concerned that I've been sick for a long time and I'm not getting better. I've seen a lot of doctors and haven't really gotten a clear diagnosis or a path towards treatment. Here's some of the things I've read about. Are these areas that you're able to or willing to help me look at? Just kind of frame it in a neutral way that's not threatening. But it also does really require someone who needs to understand what the world of tick-borne disease looks like, what the world of mold looks like, what the world of mental emotional healing looks like, what the world of the gut looks like. So you can get a sense, I think, by doing some research and background, just seeing what people are talking about. But it's hard. It is hard, and it's even hard within my practice because I have colleagues who I know and who I love, and but they're not frequently as well versed in some of these key areas. And so I think in general they move people forward somewhat, but then I always want them to be thinking about, okay, now maybe I should refer this person out to someone who spends their day doing this, more intense piece, because otherwise things can kind of stall, right? So, I guess that sense of openness and that sense of, not framing it in a forceful way, because that will be off-putting, but just saying, are you willing to look at these things with me? And also, what's your degree of experience?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky thing. And I think, you said earlier that doctors have a lot of education, and there's also a lot of ego. And a lot of, I don't know, I think I would say that maybe this was isolated in my medical training, but I doubt it, which was, there wasn't really much permission to not know, or to be cultivated as a humble learner. Like, there was all this kind of requirement to seem like you knew stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a lot of feedback in my first medical rotation for asking too many questions. I was like, well, I didn't know the answers. And they're like, yeah, you say I don't know a lot. And I'm like, but I don't.
Right.
But it was, I mean, the culture really drills it into you that you can't show, you have to feign kind of knowledge even when it's not there. And then you go look it up on the sly, right?
Yeah, not knowing is weakness, and there's that kind of aggressive, where you're sort of getting poked at, or like, challenged, like, do you know this? And if you don't know it, then the next person does the next year, and then you look silly. It is a tough culture in medical training. I wonder if that's shifting a little bit, because over time I think we're going more towards, being good at knowing where to find information and how to look up information, as opposed to maybe having it all stored in our brains. We do recognize that it's impossible to know everything. But I think that culture still lives on pretty strongly within traditional medical training. And, it's also a sign of insecurity on the part of the upper level person, if they're trying to, show their strength or their superiority, so it can be tough.
So I think I saw on your website that you're going to be also creating programs for practitioners, like coaching programs. Is that true? Like, is it possible that if someone is working with a doctor who's open-minded but doesn't know what next steps to take, they could work with you as well?
My current clinic partner, Chris Gresser, is doing that. He has a training program both for physicians as well as for health coaches. And so it's not something I'm directly involved with, but yeah, that is one of his areas of passion, of, developing, amplifying the functional medicine, ancestral health training on the practitioner side, on the health coach side.
That's great news.
Yes.
That's great news. Because a lot of people actually have very compassionate and open-minded physicians, family doctors, internists, pediatricians, if they're working with their child, who are just like, look, I don't have time to learn this. I would love to help you. If you give me something I can learn quickly, you know what I mean? Like, I'd be willing to work with you. So that's.
Yeah, time is a big barrier, right? Because they're just, so overwhelmed already.
For sure.
Yeah, I love that.
So speaking of time, I don't want to take all of yours up. I know you have patients still today to see. But before we end, is there anything that we missed that you'd like to shine light on for this unique population?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate what you're doing in terms of creating an online community with content and with support. I'm really curious. I just got a glimpse of it from the start here, but I'm very curious to see, how that develops. And I think that's, the way of the future is offering these hybrid learning places. And, the coronavirus, with its push towards online and telemedicine, I think is just really accelerating the opportunities in these areas. So, we're also working on, we've done put a lot of these lifestyle pillar content pieces into play with wellness programs for fire departments over the last 4 years. And that's been a hugely gratifying project to kind of give back to the first responder community, and also just to see really them just take this information in and own it and appreciate it. They're scared. They're scared of, they're amazing. They're doing these incredible jobs. They're totally selfless. They're, just like go get them type people. But they're taking a hit, and they're taking a toll from, higher risk of cancer and higher risk of cardiovascular health and higher risk of behavior health, mental health, burnout, compassion fatigue. Suicide, unfortunately, is the biggest killer of firefighters in the line of duty. And yeah, to me, that's totally unacceptable, right? So we put together these, 4 to 6 month long program that gives all that basic information we talked about. We put them through a paleo template reset diet and just let them see how much better their bodies feel. Teach them, core building, strengthening, movement exercises for injury prevention, stress reduction and mindfulness, peer support to get them community and talking to each other, right? They don't want to talk to outsiders. They want to kind of learn from each other. And metabolic support, sleep support, kind of, their circadian rhythm issues are huge given, and they recognize all these things given their shift schedules and unique challenges. So they get the risks, and giving them solutions to try to pivot and to protect themselves from, some of these challenges, and to increase their own internal resilience and also the resilience of their colleagues and their brothers and sisters in the departments, etc. So that's been really wonderful opportunity.
Wow, I love that you're doing that and focusing on first responders. It's such a huge unmet need. And what I'm hearing is that all of the things that they would do or one would do to prevent burnout, trauma, injury, chronic disease are the same things that people need to focus on when they're getting well from complex, chronic, mystery illness. Imagine that.
Imagine that. Same issues, repackaged a little bit. We just dive into the research literature and we pull out things that are pertinent to them, and we, we're heavy on the science. We try to, make it just kind of make the information sell itself. But if the science is there, you go to PubMed, you look up articles on any of this stuff. The common pathways of metabolic disorders, blood sugar dysregulation, insulin, inflammatory gut issues, eating the rainbow, all this stuff. It's it's easy to pull data from. And I heard an interesting fact actually. The ACE score, adverse childhood events.
Yeah.
First responders, and I have to dive into the research on this a little bit because I just had this conversation last week. But the first responders actually, as a tendency, tend to have higher ACE scores. And so it's something about being sort of hypervigilant, being attuned to other people's needs because of possibly trauma early on, that makes them pick careers in being first responders, firefighters, police, etc., and also makes them really good at it, but makes them, higher risk for triggering old trauma and having, worse adverse outcomes. So on the one hand, it's just, that was really interesting to me to kind of see that as, that experience they've had as a possible strength, but also something that we have to help them work with in order to protect themselves from, increased fallout from their amazing, unbelievable choice to protect us, right?
Yeah, because you're right. It's absolutely not okay that those people should be the sickest.
Yeah, and
nobody deserves to be sick, but like people who are serving on the front lines, not okay.
It's all modifiable. They just have to be able to willing and able to do the work. So one thing also that we've learned is that it can't come from me, it can't come from us, it can't come from a doctor. We go in, we give them the information, but then they have to bring it to each other, right? Because there is very much this sort of very tight-knit community, and they really trust each other, and they have a sort of inherent distrust for outsiders who maybe don't get their culture.
Yeah.
And so we've learned, the Berkeley Fire Department, who originally brought us on, and what we've done with them is to teach all this information to their new recruit academy. So we're getting them right at the front door before they've entered into the service, and then they're bringing this information in and sort of trickle up phenomenon.
Wow. Fabulous. Well, thank you for your service on behalf of those people who serve. That's beautiful work.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really a wonderful passion project. It's really fun.
Awesome. And thank you again. This has been great.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, Sunjya, have a great day.
Okay, you too. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove Playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.